Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Nearly 2 months after April Woodhouse's death, her family is still seeking answers. The mother of 4 from Punematang First Nation died on February 1st after she was found freezing and unresponsive outside of a residence. Manitoba RCMP say they're still investigating the incident, but not as a homicide. APTN Sierra Bettens spoke with the family.
Silas Woodhouse Jr. has been distributing flash drives with recordings of his late sister April Woodhouse singing. He's raising money for a funeral their family hasn't been able to have. Before they lay her to rest, they're calling for a thorough investigation into April's death, which they believe is suspicious. But after nearly 2 months, they say they haven't been getting answers.
We know without a shadow of a doubt that something happened to her. And this is it right here. We have all the proof. We have the photos. We need disclosure as the Woodhouse family of my sister.
On January 31st, the Woodhouse family was in the Punematang First Nation for a wake service. April's eldest sister, Rose Stagg, says a woman approached her in a panic.
She told me that you have to come quick, there's an emergency, your sister's been found froze outside a house.
When Stagg arrived at the scene, April was wrapped in blankets. Stagg says a group had found her unresponsive outside a residence, kicked down the door, and brought her inside to keep her warm. Paramedics arrived and RCMP shortly after. April was transported to the Ashern Hospital and pronounced deceased. She was 50 years old. At the hospital, Stagg held April's hand. That's when she noticed.
She had cuts and bruises, big bruises on her hands. Her little pinky was, part of it was missing.
The Woodhouse family shared images of April's injuries with APTN. In a February press release, RCMP said an autopsy confirmed the cause of death was not due to physical injuries or exposure, but the family believes there's more to the story.
That's one thing my sister would never ever do, is to go to someone's place and just fall asleep there. Never, ever. She lived close. She would have walked all the way home to go and sleep.
April Woodhouse was a mother of 4 and a grandmother of 10.
My mom had a beautiful life, and she was loved by me, my brother, my sisters, my nephews, and I just had a baby recently last year, and that's all she would talk about to me.
Growing up, she followed in the footsteps of her father.
My dad trained her to sing, but it came naturally because my dad was a natural singer, and she sang. As soon as she started to sing and perfect those songs, my dad took her everywhere.
In an email to APTN, Sergeant Paul Menegra from RCMP Media Relations confirmed Woodhouse's death is still under investigation by Gypsumville RCMP and Major Crime Services. He said it was not designated as a crime scene and, based on autopsy results, not determined to be a homicide. In an email to APTN, John Eunice, Manitoba's chief medical examiner, said Woodhouse's autopsy found evidence of underlying natural disease and minor blunt force injuries, but no internal injuries or evidence of asphyxia, ruling out death due to violence or strangulation. He said DNA analysis hasn't been conducted and the cause of death is still pending toxicology results. Based on the initial police investigation and autopsy, Eunice stated, quote, "There was no indication that Miss Woodhouse's death was suspicious in nature," unquote. But the Woodhouse family believes otherwise. They're calling for a second autopsy and DNA analysis.
We need to get this DNA testing done, the second autopsy. We're going to do everything we can to get it done. We're not going to stop.
We need this done for her. We want her to rest in peace. We want to lay our sister to rest.
But until they get that closure, they say funeral arrangements will have to wait. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Now to Alberta, where the family of John Wells, a First Nations man who died while in Calgary police custody last September, is reacting to a recent act of reconciliation by the city's police service. APTN's crises has more.
In a traditional Blackfoot ceremony on Tuesday, the Calgary Police Service received 15 blessed eagle feathers. They were blessed by Elder Clarence Wolfleg. 11 will be used for ceremonial and cultural police events, including the swearing-in ceremony of new Indigenous police recruits. 4 will be used for its Indigenous Junior Police Academy. Sergeant Julian Klein says it's a commitment that came from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action.
It gives our membership, the sworn officers as well as civilians, the opportunity to take their oath on the eagle feather to Creator as well as their ancestors, and that's a good thing.
Previously, new Indigenous policing recruits would have to take their oath on the Bible.
The eagle feather is a very sacred item, as we know, because the eagle flies the highest and it's directly to Creator. And for us, that's culturally appropriate.
However, despite the good intentions, the reconciliation event comes during a very emotional time for the family of John Wells.
We, the family, should have been informed, or, at least my sister should have been informed, the mother of the deceased.
Laverne Wells, the auntie of the late John Wells, says they are heartbroken and deeply distressed. They feel the event is premature and possibly misguided by both the police service and the elder involved.
We, the family, feel that the Calgary City Police don't deserve those gifts, at least not yet.
John Wells died on September 17, 2024, after Calgary police were called to remove him from the lobby of the Carriage House Hotel in Calgary. According to the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, or ACERT, Calgary police tackled, punched, and deployed a taser on Wells. He was unarmed and told police, "I don't want to die." When EMS arrived, they injected him with a sedative while he was left face down in handcuffs, leg restraints, and a spit mask. Minutes later, Wells was unresponsive and declared deceased. ACERT continues its investigation.
This is a very sensitive issue. We're still mourning, we're still grieving, and it just opened up a lot of hurtful wounds, when we heard about it yesterday. And my sister was really devastated and distraught.
John Wells was one of many Indigenous people who died while interacting with police or while in custody in 2024. From August 30th to December 14th of last year, 15 Indigenous people died.
They need to put a stop to it. This needs to be undone. I don't care how they do it, but it needs to be rescinded until the investigation is completed.
The Calgary Police Service says it cannot respond to the Wells incident or how the family is responding to that reconciliation event, as the ACERT investigation is still ongoing. Crises, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, Creason. Some First Nations say they're being treated like immigrants by Quebec's provincial government. This time it's due to a law seeking to establish an integration model for immigrants to assimilate into Quebec's culture. As our correspondent Savannah Craig reports, some say Bill 84 doesn't clarify the First Nations and Inuit are exempted.
My ancestors were there when your ancestors arrived on boats. I welcome you to Kahnawake, and we can have a conversation about what our relationship should be and how your people can start packing up.
This is how Grand Chief Cody Daibo welcomed Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet at the Assembly of First Nations last December. He's talking about a larger issue of First Nations being treated like immigrants by the provincial government on their own land.
They used to say there's the St. Lawrence Iroquois. So when Samuel first sailed down the St. Lawrence,
The people he met were the St. Lawrence Iroquois, who have no relation to the Mohawks, and the people who are here today, they're completely distinct people that just vanished.
For the Grand Chief, it's more than ignoring history.
Traditionally and historically, this was all our territory.
There's concern of grouping First Nations and Inuit in with Quebec legislation that targets immigrants.
It references immigrants, minorities, different things like that, which First Nations could fall under. Are we going to fall under that?
The Grand Chief is referring to Bill 84, which he says the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake only heard about last week. It is an act respecting national integration and was tabled in January of this year.
Le modèle canadien, le multiculturalisme, ne convient pas au Québec.
The intention of the bill is to establish how immigrants will integrate into Quebec's culture and language.
We are yet again extremely disappointed by the approach your government has taken to hastily drafting and debating important legislation without ever discussing this with us.
The Grand Chief sent a formal letter to Quebec Premier François Legault expressing the Council's opposition to this bill and for clarification that First Nations and Inuit will not be included. He did not receive a response from Quebec.
What Quebec decides to do with their citizens, that's their right to do, and we always state, we don't want to interfere in that. But when legislation that they're trying to create could have or does have an impact on Kahnawake, then it becomes our business.
Bill 84 does recognize the right of First Nations and Inuit in Quebec to preserve and develop their own culture and language. But the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake believe that's not enough, and it must be invited to discuss legislation that potentially affects Mohawks.
Your continued attempts to legislate lands that are not yours must stop.
Kenneth Deere is a member of the Haudenosaunee External Relations Committee. He compares Bill 84 to Quebec's language law, Bill 101.
We've been fighting language legislation for decades now. It was insulting that we have to ask permission to get our education in English when we're paying for that, for our education. So we objected to that, and so we pulled. They wouldn't change the legislation to accommodate us.
Kenneth says Bill 101 led to Kahnawake creating its own high school.
Even today, in 2025, we have the province of Quebec trying again, not overtly, but under our radar, trying to get us to become more Quebec, more French, and more culturally French, and at the expense of our language, and our culture, and our freedom, and our sovereignty.
APTN reached out to the minister responsible for First Nations and Inuit relations, Ian Lafreniere. He did not provide a response before our deadline.
If the intent of Bill 84 is not to affect Ngwengwe people, well then clearly state that in the law. Don't kind of leave it open for interpretation because we don't want to be going into a court setting and trying to debate that interpretation at the end of the day if that's not what the intent is.
Bill 84 is still at the committee stage in the Quebec National Assembly. Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Kahnawake, Mohawk Territory.
A Migma musician had a huge moment on Canada's Got Talent. That story and more still to come. Welcome back. Migma musician Didi Austin is raising awareness about residential schools by performing her song called Buried Truth. Austin took her song to the national stage on Canada's Got Talent, which resulted in a gold buzzer from Howie Mandel. Angel Moore has that story.
Forget the language our parents taught us.
That is Didi Austin's 2022 video, Buried Truth. It is an emotional song about residential schools.
And I took that opportunity to, create a song that didn't beat around the bush. I wanted it to be very straightforward, and I wanted it to tell a very direct story and just share the experiences that everyone was put through in the Indian residential school system.
Austin wrote and composed the song, inspired by the suspected 215 unmarked graves found at the site of the former residential school in Kamloops, and her great-grandmother's experience at the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School in Nova Scotia. Austin is 19 years old and from the Abeguet First Nation on Prince Edward Island.
They scrubbed our skin with a wire brush.
She performed Bury Truth on Canada's Got Talent, getting the gold buzzer from Howie Mandel. That sends her directly to the semifinals with a $25,000 prize.
The golden buzzer wasn't even in my brain. When I got the opportunity to perform on Canada's Got Talent, I really took the opportunity to use the national platform to amplify not only my voice, but the voice of my people and the voices of those who didn't make it home. I was trying to, just be a voice and try and amplify our story as Indigenous people.
Austin began writing and composing music when she was 11 years old. She has performed across the country and won 19 awards and nominations. With 2 albums and a third soon to be released, she hopes to inspire young people to follow their dreams.
I was bullied pretty much my whole life, and I pretty much got to the point where I was like, okay, this is probably not the right thing for me. And then I turned it into a motivation and I created something for myself. And I just want everyone to know that everything is possible and you can do it.
The Golden Buzzer fast tracks Austin to the semifinals, where the winner receives $1 million. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabutuk, also known as Halifax.
Amazing stuff, Dee Dee. Good luck in the semis. Part 2 of a 3-part series on policing by APTN Investigates airs this Saturday. We'll speak with the reporter about the documentary after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And the coastline may be snow-covered on March 28th, but the beauty around Leading Tickles, Newfoundland, is no less beautiful. Thanks to Aiden Power for the photo. You can send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecasts. Starting on the East Coast, +3 in Halifax, -3 in Charlottetown. -13 in Kuujjuaq, 6 below with snow in Nain. 0 and flurries in Montreal, -2 in Val-d'Or. +4 in Sault Ste. Marie, 3 above in North Bay. 0 with snow in Thunder Bay, +1 in Sioux Lookout. -4 for God's Lake and Norway House. 2 below in Winnipeg, cloudy and -6 in Dauphin. Cloudy and -6 in Regina, Saskatoon and North Battleford. -4 in Meadow Lake and La Ronge. In northern Alberta, -4 in High Level, 9 below in Fort Chipewyan. -3 in Edmonton, 2 above in Lethbridge. 10 in Vancouver, 14 in Kamloops. +4 in Prince George, 6 in Smithers. 2 above in Whitehorse, -11 in Old Crow. -13 in Yellowknife, 11 below with snow in Norman Wells. Sunny and 18 below in Sax Harbor, -21 in Paulatuck. -27 with snow in Chesterfield and Baker Lake. -24 in Resolute, 31 below in Joe Haven. Indigenous police forces across the country are battling soaring crime rates, a worsening drug crisis, and a funding model that doesn't recognize them as essential. Coming up tomorrow night on a special 3-part series, Inside Policing, APTN Investigates heads to the front lines to find out the true cost of underfunding First Nations policing in Canada. With more on the series, we're joined by APTN Investigates video journalist Tom Fenario. Tom, thanks for being with us to talk about part 2 in this series. Your episode is called Essential Service. Can you tell us why?
Well, essential service is a designation given by the Government of Canada that describes any job necessary for the safety or security of the public. That means that services that are essential, such as policing, receive more flexible funding. There are 36 self-administered Indigenous police services in Canada that serve over 100 First Nation and Inuit communities, and they are not considered essential in the legal sense, meaning that they get locked into these multi-year funding agreements that don't always take into account the challenges of policing Indigenous communities. And because they're not essential, it's hard for them to adapt when they need more manpower or better equipment or to fix infrastructure. So that's all to say, currently Indigenous policing is not technically an essential service, but ask just about any officer or person living in an Indigenous community and they'll say they feel pretty darn essential to me. They might not use the word darn though.
Yeah, we hear of some of the challenges that these services are facing. What are some of the issues that you heard about that Indigenous police services in Canada are facing?
Yeah, I mean, like many places in Canada, lots of communities are dealing with the toxic drug crisis. Actually, earlier this year, my colleague Kenneth Jackson did a story about drug dealers from Southern Ontario moving into Northern Ontario First Nations, where they know, unfortunately, there's a demand for the product due to things like intergenerational trauma. So I visited this one Ojibwe community a few hours east of Thunder Bay, Nedamazagabeg Nishnabeg, who's dealing with this. And I did a couple of grade yard shift ride-alongs with the Anishinabeg Police Service. And what's striking to me is that, you know, this is a small community of about 400 people, but there's only 3 officers working it. And so it's really hard for them to give 24/7 service, which a community like this needs because they're going through a rough time right now. So. And also, like Indigenous policing, when it works well, it's community policing. It's building trust and partnerships with the community to try and address the root causes of crime and hopefully prevent it from happening again, or at least from happening at all. But it's hard to do that when you're just treading water and trying to hold down the fort. I should say that the Government of Canada recognizes these issues and has proposed making Indigenous policing an essential service, but that was over 3 years ago now.
Yeah, I know there's some court cases going on too. What is the holdup with regards to the essential service legislation?
In one word, sovereignty. The provinces do not want to give up jurisdiction over policing, and First Nations and Inuit want to have self-determination over security in their communities. So the federal government is navigating these opposing viewpoints in the proposed legislation, and things appear to be stalled, but maybe there'll be some movement after the April 28th federal election. But, you know, for folks policing and living on the front lines in these communities, every day counts.
Well, Tom, the promo there looked great. Looking forward to it and this series continuing. Appreciate you taking some time for us.
No problem. Thanks a lot.
You can catch APTN Investigates Inside Policing Essential Service tomorrow night on APTN. It's Friday, so that means Nouvelle Nationale is coming up in a couple of minutes. Here's a look at what they're working on.
Hi, I'm Kim Sullivan, host of your Nouvelle Nationale, your weekly French language news magazine. Join us here tonight, 6:30 Eastern Time, for a half-hour show where this week's top stories in news and entertainment blend perfectly en français. Tonight at Quebec University opens a center for their Indigenous students. 3 Innu nations sign a deal with the federal government, and an homage to the legendary Florent Volant, founding member of iconic 90s band Castin.
Thanks, Kim. You can catch her in less than 90 seconds from now. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Friday. Marcy Miigwech, have a great night.